Hello and welcome to Can We Still Be Friends, a podcast that tests the limits of the friendship between two people who mistake movie taste for personal morality. Each episode is devoted to one piece of pulp culture that we can't agree on. As a way of preserving the friendship and reaching common ground, we revisit the work, hear each other out, and decide whether our friendship truly can survive. I'm Nate Goss.
And I'm Ryan Ebling. With summer in full swing, we're getting into the summer movie spirit with Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, which came out in the summer of 2010. Recently, the good folks over at The Dissolve put it on their list of the 50 best summer blockbusters.
Scott Pilgrim has also been on our mind because Bryan Lee O'Malley, the original author of the comics series Scott Pilgrim, has just released his follow-up, which is a standalone graphic novel called Seconds. It's getting rave reviews.
Calling Scott Pilgrim a blockbuster might be getting a little loose with the language, as the film made just under $48 million, falling short of recouping the projected $60 million budget. But as they say, it certainly has the markings and feel of a summer blockbuster. Critics were split, and the movie rates at just 69 out of 100 on Metacritic. The film failed to find a real audience at the box office, but it's found more of a following in its DVD days. Fans of the film are faithful and passionate, while detractors are, well, we'll hear from a detractor in a bit. So the time for the final battle has come. Is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World a silly mess aimed only to please gamers and comic book geeks? Or does it have merit beyond the niche appeal? Limber up your thumbs and get ready, Player One. The fight begins now.
All about?
I guess if we're gonna date, you may have to defeat my 7 evil exes.
You have 7 evil ex-boyfriends?
7 evil exes, yes.
And I have to fight? Defeat your 7 evil exes if we're going to continue to date?
Pretty much.
So what you're saying right now is we are dating?
I guess.
Does that mean we can make out?
Sure.
Cool.
Okay, that was a clip from Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, a film that we are going to be discussing in this episode. But we're going to try doing something a little bit different this time and see how well it works. We're going to change the format up a little bit. We wanted to just spend a minute and talk about what since our last episode, which was Beatles' Hard Day's Night, what's happened since then? And what was some of the feedback we got? What did we think of it? Was there anything that we said that changed our minds or had us thinking throughout the week?
Well, I think you and I, we agreed almost on everything, so I don't think that there was much to think about.
And unfortunately, Evan's not here to defend himself.
Right. I mean, he didn't hate it. But yeah, I actually talked to one of our listeners, Drew, who mentioned that growing up, he was a huge Beatles fan, and his dad only listened to 3 musicians, the 3 Bs, Bob Dylan, the Beach Boys, and the Beatles. So if that's almost like a desert island, you can only listen to 3.
It's not so bad.
That's not a bad 3 to grow up on. So for him, his memory of Hard Day's Night was a little bit more as a kid, and it seemed kind of superfluous fluff that it wasn't really essential Beatles. Almost what you were thinking in not seeing it for so long is how he still views it. But he did say that he thinks he wants to see the movie again, which
I think that's been the biggest feedback I've heard. Hasn't even been so much about more specifics of the movie. It's been a very general, I want to watch that movie, or it's been so long since I've seen that movie, I really want to revisit it, which I think is great. I think that's definitely a good thing to come out of that episode. Yeah. And obviously, since we loved it so much, we're going to say, do that. That's a good idea. It's out on Criterion.
It is a good idea, yeah.
Definitely go back and check that out. And don't feel like it's closed either. If you still have comments or anything, definitely, you can still leave your comment on Hard Day's Night.
Absolutely.
Which, we want to say before we really jump into Scott Pilgrim that the conversation's always going. We've got some great comments for that already came in about Scott Pilgrim as we were preparing for this. But in general, let us know what you have to say. Get on canwestillbefriends.net. Leave your comments. You can always email us, feedback@canwestillbefriends.net.
Right.
And this is something else I want to throw out there. We like to really shake it up, get a little, in the danger zone.
I don't even know what he's going to say.
What I'm going to say is, what if we let you, the listener, pitch to us ideas of stuff to talk about.
Wow.
Has that ever been done before?
I don't
Ever
think
in the
so.
history of podcasts? Hey, you
Or television.
listener.
I don't think that viewers, listeners have ever had a chance to vote or
It's been
chime
kind
in. I got to tell you, I'm excited. I'm nervous about the new ground we're breaking.
of. Well, as all revolutions are kind of like that, they're very nerve-wracking,
Yeah.
and they can. There's so much uncertainty in the air. You just don't know what's going to happen. But it could be a beautiful thing.
It's electric in this room right now. I wish you guys could be here to feel this. But I think that's a great idea. I would love to hear what movies you think we should be watching.
Yeah, if you wanted to, make a recommendation or just give us your comments, you can also give us a phone call. The number is 847-306-9532. Just call us and leave a message, and who knows, maybe you'll be on the air. I also did really quickly want to say, if you wanted to see our thoughts on some of our movies that we've never discussed or anything, there is a site called Letterboxd. It's letterboxd.com. And you can go on there and you can see what we've rated. So if you wanted to know how we felt about a certain movie and if you were just appalled by it, let us know, and maybe we'll have to explain ourselves on the next few episodes.
Yeah, and you can follow us on there, and we are follow back girls, so we will. We are interested in what you guys think too.
If you want something bad, you have to fight for it. Step up your game, Scott. Break out the L word.
Lesbian?
The other L word.
Lesbians?
It's love, Scott. I wasn't trying to trick you. Hey, buddy, look.
Let's discuss what our listeners thought about Scott Pilgrim before we get into it.
Yeah, so we have a Facebook page, and if you don't like it, you can, or if you haven't liked it yet, I would recommend go on there, because we posted on there for people to give us your feedback on the movie Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Phil, one of our listeners, said he just wrote in, "Let's start by saying that I absolutely love this movie. Then again, this movie was built for me. I am the niche this movie hits perfectly. That being said, it absolutely is a niche movie. I can see a lot of reasons why some may not enjoy this movie as much as I do. If you don't really play video games or read comics, then there are two layers that are a large part of the movie right there. The music is another aspect a lot of people don't care or know about. I suppose I enjoy it so much because it's clever in a lot of ways. When a joke is made, it's made with not only the words spoken, but the editing, the sound effects, visual gags, and the music as well. It's not for everyone, but it's definitely for me."
That's very diplomatic, I think.
It is.
Saying that. I think he's absolutely right, by the way. And we'll get into that more. But I appreciate that he is willing to say that it might not be for everybody, even though I kind of think that it can be for everybody.
Okay, well, we're going to get into that. Let's just talk a little bit about maybe where the lines are drawn on this, in case it wasn't clear before. This is a movie that you absolutely love.
Yeah.
And I've seen it once. I saw it in the theater. That is before we rewatched it for this episode. And I didn't hate it. I didn't even really dislike it. I just thought it was okay.
But you weren't interested in seeing it again.
Not at all. No.
Not at all.
No,
So that
I had no.
seems
I had
a
no.
little bit more than ambivalent.
Well, and here's the thing, and what I wonder is if you've ever had this experience. Actually, I know you had this experience because we talked about it in our Gladiator episode, and that is where you see a movie and you're kind of like, okay, that's fine, but then it's more or less the sort of this huge spark of like enthusiasm about a movie that just surrounds you in your peer group.
Yeah.
And you're not in that crowd, that group that just loves this movie to pieces. And in a way, it almost makes
it turns your ambivalence into dislike.
Right, because I think like you on in this, when I say you, I'm saying me. Like I honestly tried to figure out what was the appeal in this movie. I didn't obviously watch it again, but I did for this episode. But in my head, I just kind of ran over everything again. I was like, what did I miss? What was it? And because I wasn't finding anything, it was kind of like this, you know what? That movie this movie just ticks me off.
That movie's trying to be
Right.
inaccessible. All right. Well, I think that there are some listeners who agree with you.
Right.
In that galvanizing force.
Well, that's true. We
that
had
popularity is.
Our listener Dan wrote in and said, "I'm glad to see you're on the right side of this one, Nate. The thing that gets me about this movie is that it's so deeply loved by the same people that loathe nostalgia. but they miss that it's absolutely steeped in nostalgia and what I'll call boy quirkiness, to compare it with Juno, which was steeped in nostalgia and girl quirkiness.
I want to come back to that, or should I address it now? We'll come back to it. I think you're a little bit off base with the nostalgia thing, but not totally off base, because there is definitely nostalgia there and referentialism.
Absolutely, yeah.
But continue. Let him continue the rant.
Well, that's only part one of the rant. There was a little bit more there, and I'm actually paraphrasing a little bit because it was a lot. Dan, you got a lot to say about this
verbose,
movie,
and we love it.
But later on, he did kind of bring it back to some more general type of things, and he says, "I'll say that Scott Pilgrim hit the right note with enough people at the right time and did enough good that on the whole we're willing to overlook the bad. What was good was exceptional, but what was bad was also pretty exceptional." The pacing was the main thing that sunk the movie for me the last time. It had 2 or 3 fights more than it really had space for.
So Dan has seen it more than once.
Yes, it sounds like he has. I mean, I don't know, but I think so.
I believe he said he did.
Yeah. I'm sure it worked well in the graphic novel when you weren't as bound by time and could, I assume, do each X as an issue or a chapter. Not sure the format. But in a movie, it just felt like doing too much. Good cinematography, which I happily grant doesn't make up for it failing in so many other respects, like the lack of tension and the lack of actual character development. You get Scott at the beginning being totally self-centered, then at the end he has an epiphany and completely changes. That isn't development, it's magic. And the bulk of the acting was ridiculously flat. Some of the X's were slightly more dynamic, but the bulk of them still only did one thing, and Knives was pretty dynamic. And that seemed to drive the humor. It had a few good jokes, I'll grant that. On the whole, it seemed tailored to a very niche audience, and that niche will murder for the reputation of this movie. I'm really sorry that I just poisoned the well on that one.
Boy, oh boy. I would love to go point by point. I feel like Dan...
Well, okay, let's move on because we should talk about our rewatching eventually.
Yes, but speaking of point by point, we've got a fella, Chris, who gave us 13 reasons why he likes Scott Pilgrim.
This is the other side of the argument here from our listeners.
Other side. So we've heard the dissent, and now let's hear the pro Scott Pilgrim side. Kind of summarizing, he says Edgar Wright did a hell of a job adapting scenes from the graphic novel. Some are almost panel by panel, with some other awesome stuff thrown in, which is an interesting perspective. I have not read it. Nate, you have not read it.
I haven't read it either. We probably
I honestly
maybe we should
don't really want to. The graphic novel, it doesn't seem to appeal to me, but I've skimmed it.
Have you? I haven't even. I've seen the cover.
Really matter.
That's about as far as I've gotten.
So he also talks about lots of subliminally funny things to notice and Easter eggs in the background. It's a very thick movie. It's hilarious, strange humor that I've seen people try to copy many times since and fail miserably, which I agree. This is kind of a one-of-a-kind humor. Like Dan, he says excellent cinematography. He talks about the practical and CGI effects blended remarkably well, which kept the budget down, which is good to keep in mind. He liked the soundtrack. He actually lists character development as one of the things the movie does well, in direct opposition to Dan's
Well, maybe we need to
point.
play judge in
Maybe
this.
we need to get Chris and Dan in here. Chris continues, the fight scenes are so good. He repeats, in all caps, so good. Running jokes throughout the movie that don't suck. He also was a fan of the wardrobe design, and he says the film had nearly flawless pacing. So, again, direct opposition to Dan. Is this a matter of different strokes for different folks, or is somebody wrong here? Chris did admit that he thinks that Michael and Elizabeth were slightly miscast, which is a big deal because they were the leads. Overall, they worked, but that's my main gripe with the movie. I don't think it's for everyone, though. He echoes Phil's sentiments.
That's a lot of people saying it's not for everyone.
And okay, I just want to, a little glimpse into what I'm trying to say about this movie, and
Okay.
it might be overly ambitious. I think this movie can be for everyone. I think this movie is objectively good. For a movie to be good, it can't just appeal to the niche audience.
Uh-huh.
It can't just be gathering, the choir to preach to them.
It's just a niche movie at that point, then.
Right.
It's not anything more than that.
Right. And I'm saying that a movie has to have more going on, and that Scott Pilgrim does have more going on than just trying to get people to laugh at a reference to Street Fighter. Or whatever.
Uh-huh. Well, how about this then? How about we move into our rewatching?
Well, yeah,
Of
let's
this
do
movie.
that. We got to start. We got to start there.
Well, how about this then?
We're not shaking
Also,
up the format so much.
right in that you should also talk about what we rewatched it, but you also should talk about your initial watching, your first time seeing this movie.
Oh, yeah.
You know, what made you interested in it, all that good stuff.
So anyway, I first heard of the film, the usual advertising before the release. I didn't give it much thought though, because I hadn't known much about the Scott Pilgrim comics, and I was pretty weary of Michael Cera, especially post Juno. I mean, I liked Arrested Development, but he was sort of one trick pony at that point. It felt like, and it wasn't really until a friend of ours kept talking it up, mainly saying Edgar Wright directed it. Edgar Wright directed it, and so I started to think about it because I liked Shaun of the Dead. And he had seen it, and I think he insisted that we saw it with him, and I think you saw it with me.
I did.
We all went together.
I think we all went together. Yeah.
And as soon as I got in there, the moment the Universal logo shows up in 8-bit, the music plays in that, video game bleep and bloop. I was hooked. And the movie continued to endear itself to me with its frenetic, abstract opening credits, which I realized on subsequent viewings contained signature Edgar Wright foreshadowing and was actually the recommendation of Quentin Tarantino. There were no opening credit sequence, and Quentin Tarantino saw a first cut and said, "You need to put opening credits," which I find interesting.
Quentin Tarantino a fan of this movie, or what's his connection with it? I didn't even.
Edgar Wright showed him an early cut.
Okay.
And Quentin Tarantino, Kevin Smith, and who else did he show it to? He directed Up in the Air and Thank You for Smoking.
Reitman.
Jason Reitman.
Yeah.
Showed it to all of them, and they were all big fans. So anyway, and so there were also just the thick layers of jokes, the visual, verbal, audio jokes everywhere, that packed each scene, the characterizations, the love story, the fights. It all impressed me. And a couple years later, I watched it again, and I was surprised to find that I liked it even more than the first time. And the brilliance of Edgar Wright really became apparent when I watched it again. I realized he was taking huge risks with this movie, visually, just really telling his story in a way that wasn't safe, really. And it was a huge risk, but it had an even bigger payoff because it worked. So these later viewings helped me to appreciate the craft of Edgar Wright, that his comedy is extremely thought out and still remains fast and effortless and vibrant. And so I may have tipped my hand, but I love this movie. I really do. It's one of my favorite movies.
Do you think that your love for it comes out of a general love for not just, great filmmaking as far as cinematography, the craft of film, but what the subject matter is with the gaming and the comics and all that
That's
stuff?
hard for me to say.
Because you love it, so it's hard to disconnect yourself from
right.
that. Yeah.
There's that, but I think I was really trying this time because I had seen what people had said, that it's niche, that it only appeals to gamers and comic book fans, and even then, not all gamers and comic book fans. So I was trying to see how much of this movie is steeped in references to video games and comic books, and how much doesn't work if you don't know certain things. And I feel like it's a movie that rewards people who know things, but it doesn't rely on that. And I know it was beneficial to me seeing people's comments and seeing how many people said, it's not for everyone, blah, blah, blah. Because you can't argue that. You can't say...
it is for everyone, because you're...
Like, our argument would go nowhere if all I said was, I like it. What we're trying to do here...
There'd be no point to this podcast
Right.
if it was just a matter of, I like it, it's not for you, I guess.
Right. So in the spirit of Edgar Wright, I'm going to take a huge risk here. And I am going to commit fully to that risk and say, I think this movie, as I've already said, can be more or less for everyone. No movie is for everyone, I know that. But that this movie has a broader appeal than comic books and video games, that it's objectively a good movie. And that it is a movie that you can think about and should think about, and you will be rewarded by thinking more deeply about it.
All right, case closed for you. That is
No, not case closed. That was opening
remarks, I
Yeah.
should say. Yeah, sorry. Got my courtroom jargon
Jeez.
mixed up. Okay, then so you're basically saying that this movie, contrary to what it maybe even looks like on the surface, it has universal appeal. It has some broader themes going on. It's working at a deeper level than just, hey, gamers, you're going to love this, you know?
Absolutely.
Because, hey, look, it looks like a video game.
Right.
So
what did you think that night? I'm sure we talked about it.
we did, yeah.
But I'm sure you probably just said nothing because we were all just
everyone around me
so
was
excited
geeking out about it, and I seriously felt like it's one of the strongest feelings of I really missed something. Like there was something.
We all noticed and
And-
talked about it when you were gone.
It's like, what was with Nate?
That guy's problem.
This is Deal. What a real buzzkill. But I think that whatever you guys liked about it, it must have been something universal because I got the gaming references. I mean, in high school, I worked at an arcade, you know, and the gaming references aren't like new games. It's all gaming, like retro type games,
Right.
like all the games that we would have played, you know, Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, Tekken. And that arcade period too, with like the Dance Dance Revolution things and all that. So I got all that. At the time when I saw it, I just it didn't do it for me. That part I didn't find charming, I guess. That's what made this movie mediocre to me, was because to me it did just seem like a niche movie for people who found that type of comedy, that quirky sort of referential comedy, amusing, you know.
Yeah.
So the whole point of us doing this podcast is that we do have a feeling that when you actually talk through certain pieces of film, you might actually come out liking it better at the end, or have a different opinion about it, or rewatch it with a more open mind.
In spite of what the internet is trying to teach us, you can listen to someone and change your mind.
Right.
And you're not weak for doing that.
That's not a weakness. It's not like, you know, it's not showing that you were an idiot beforehand.
Right.
And so no one should take you
Shows
seriously.
that you're a reasonable, thoughtful person.
Right. Yeah. So I went into this movie ready to kind of take it afresh, and also coming into it having seen, well, I shouldn't say a ton more Edgar Wright, one more Edgar Wright with The World's End, because I had already seen before Scott Pilgrim, Shaun
Hot
of the
Fuzz
Dead,
had
and
come
Hot
out.
Fuzz. But
you have seen those movies more since then.
yes, and I really do love Edgar Wright. Like, I have a really big appreciation for what he does, I guess, in that trilogy, because it's basically just the Cornetto trilogy, and then this movie is all he's really
To our
done.
listeners, I just smiled when he said I love Edgar Wright, and it was only because I love Edgar Wright so much that, like,
You didn't believe me.
No, it just made me. It just I like stopped listening to Nate and just started thinking about how much I love Edgar Wright.
I saw hearts float up out of his out of his mind.
Oh, it's ridiculous! I cannot stop smiling. I love Edgar
You're like,
Wright.
you giddy little schoolgirl.
I am.
And you're Edgar Wright.
I am. If you were on the Ed Sullivan Show, I'd pee myself and scream.
Your locker would have Edgar Wright posters all
My
over
locker
it.
does have Edgar Wright posters all over it because my wife won't let me hang them up at the home.
Okay. Let's move on to when I actually rewatched this movie this week. It pains me to say this, but I really nothing really changed as far as how I felt after watching this movie. And if anything, I kind of feel like I even saw some weaknesses that in the second viewing, and I've seen it twice now, this time in the theater.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the second time I watched it, I saw some weaknesses that maybe they kind of lingered in my mind the first time I watched it, but I was just kind of willing to go with it. And this time they just really stuck out to me, and I just couldn't get over them, to the point where, contrary to what we would love to do in this podcast, I feel like I've gone, from basically having an ambivalent feeling towards this movie to almost now an actual dislike of this movie.
Ouch.
So we should get into that, obviously.
Obviously.
You said that this is a movie that is universal, has universal appeal. It can be. You said it could be something that could be universally appealing.
Right.
And I think that it had the potential for that. I don't think it succeeds at that. I think that this is not something There are too many flaws to me in the actual and weaknesses in the movie itself. I can see why it doesn't have the universal appeal. It never did get the universal appeal that it should have had as a summer blockbuster. There's a reason for that, I think. I think that this movie doesn't work for everyone, and it should. I think it'd be great if it did, and I think Edgar Wright is a good enough filmmaker. He could have done that. I don't think he did it. I don't think he succeeded at making a movie that was universally appealing with a gaming bent to it.
Okay. I know that no movie is going to be universally liked, but I thought that the Dissolve did a good job of saying some positive things about this movie. And it said that it wasn't the financial smash that many of the other movies on their list became. It fizzled at the box office, possibly because audiences were tired of its then overexposed star Michael Cera, or because it looks like a movie about video games, or because it's based on a beloved indie comic that's much less known in the mainstream. Theories abounded. But the audience that failed to flock to the film missed a smart, subversive, funny, and above all, impressively dense comedy that uses the visual language of comics and video games to major effect. In summary, it doesn't sound like much. It's yet another story about a loser's journey to finding himself, getting the girl, and learning how to be less of an ass. But in execution, it's lively, silly, and tongue-in-cheek in a way that doesn't undermine its satisfying moments of full-on superhero movie badassery. So, what do you think were its flaws? What do you think The Dissolve is wrong about in there? Or
here's the thing: is maybe it's easier if I talk about what I actually do really like about this movie.
Okay, that's a fine place to start.
And we can definitely agree on these. I like the Edgar Wright stylistic flourishes, the cutting, the editing, the pulling the comedy out of that. It's great. And there are so many parts in this movie that I genuinely think are funny. I think it's a pretty funny movie. I did laugh. Actually, I laughed more the second time watching it than I did the first time. That's a great piece. The music is awesome. You know, Nigel Godrich is like
he's one of your favorites.
He's my favorite. He's my favorite producer. If you don't know who Nigel Godrich is, he's produced Beck. He's produced Radiohead. He's produced Air. You know, he's just
produced the Scott Pilgrim versus the World soundtrack.
He did,
and composed music for it.
And Beck was involved in that as well.
Metric and Broken Social Scene all contributed music to it.
And so this movie's got style to it. Like, it's got good style to it. I enjoy that. I think it's more in just the actual mechanics of just movies that I really feel like it fails. Like, I feel like...
Are you done talking about what you thought was good?
I am. I'm going to move away. There are other things too.
Some
and
funny
I'm sure,
jokes, good music.
As you point, yeah. And if you think about it, that's enough for you to walk out the theater and say, that's an okay movie.
Uh-huh.
You know, if it's a movie that you go to and it's like, I laughed, it was pretty cool to look at, there were some pretty cool action scenes. The action scenes are done very well. You know, they're just they're just so perfect, not only in their reference, but actually working as action scenes, where there's the right amount of intensity to them and cool factor and just awesome shots and things like that.
Right.
So no beef there. The action scenes are great. I feel like this movie, though, and I had the exact same feeling the second time as I did the first time. I loved it and was totally on board for the first half hour. And then it just slowly whittled away at me to where I just wanted it to end about 15, 20 minutes before it actually did. I'm totally with Dan on this one about the pacing. I think the pacing of this movie is terrible. It takes you almost an hour into it before you really get to, I think, the second X, and there's 7. So as you get, the plot itself doesn't even reveal itself till about a half hour into it, or somewhere around there. And then you realize you're a half hour into this movie and he's still got to battle, like, maybe it's 6 at that point, because I think the plot is kind of revealed after the first fight, because it's kind of like, what the heck was that about? But then it's just like, you know, I'm thinking to myself, at the pace this is going, this movie's going to be 3.5 hours long. Like, I wanted it to move, and it just never did. I think what kept it going for that niche audience then was the pieces that were the more sort of gaming thing, and that wasn't doing it for me, so it just started to get exhausting. I just found myself getting so whittled away and burnt out on this movie by the end. I honestly, even though it was so caffeinated and frenetic and just so, like, you know, boom, 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 I was bored by the end. I just wanted it to end. I don't know who to blame for that. I mean, I think that Edgar Wright's style is certainly there, and I loved it, but it wasn't enough to carry the movie for me. That's the first part. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
No, you can keep going.
There's that. And then the second one is the Michael Cera thing to me really was wearing thin when I watched this. That I can see what you're saying about how you felt that after watching this that you could see him sort of transcending that Michael Cera-ness that people had grown to be tired of after Juno. Maybe he was showing a little bit of versatility in this performance. I could see it a little bit, but I just found it so annoying. His wide-eyed, doofus kind of act that he was doing in this, and to do that for the entire movie, the kind of he's just like a pinball reacting to everything that's happening to him in this sort of aloof kind of way. Like I said, it was funny for like the first half hour or so, and then by the end I was like, oh my gosh, you are just driving me crazy.
I don't think that he is so static. I don't think he's a doofus throughout. I think that there is a lot more change than you've given him credit for. I think there are so many scenes where he shows nuance and subtlety or just overt silliness, like the scene with the Seinfeld, like that Seinfeld sitcom scene.
Someone's happy.
Well, someone got to second base last night, and someone has a second date tonight.
Someone's lucky then.
You know when I say someone, I mean me, right? I got to second base last night. Maybe first and a half.
He's like excited because of the time he spent with Ramona, and he's like a completely different, like bubbly, a physical. He's acting with his body, which is something you don't see in other stuff that he's done. He drops the what thing by the second X. He like gets it by that. By the time we see the second X, and then the third one is when he sort of comes into making it about a pride thing where he's actually fighting for something. And then the fourth one, he's weary of it. And the fifth and sixth one, he's disillusioned with his relationship with Ramona. Like, I think there's a lot more change after every fight than you're seeing there. I think the movie plays on that wide-eyed doofiness of other movies and of itself when he dies and she says, "You've been fighting for the wrong person the whole time," or whatever. And he goes, I feel like I've learned something.
That impression itself is it, though. That's what I don't know.
But that's why he's doing it. Like, that's intentional there. And then he like turns it on and becomes a different. Like, I think that there are moments where they do that later, where they're winking at themselves. They know that this is a stock character, and they're playing almost on Michael Cera's reputation for that, using it to sort of subvert what's happening. It's a very realistic change that occurs in him that, to me, is maybe lost because the rest of the movie is so loud and so in your face,
right,
that to have subtle emotion is not common. So it's a movie that if you don't think about it and all you're doing is riding the wave of what pacing he's trying, the fights, the jokes, that you're going to miss any emotional subtext.
Yeah, but I think that the reason that you miss it is because it's not very strong.
I think it's subtle.
What you call subtle, I would call weak. I think that, and then here's the thing is, as much as I love Edgar Wright, and this is a question I want to throw to you, one thing that I wonder is romance Wright's weakness?
I don't think so. I mean, he doesn't.
I mean, I know it's an odd question to ask, but I think it has. This movie is at the center of it is supposed to be this love story. Or, I mean, I guess you could pull out of that it's more supposed to be about Scott Pilgrim's progress or maturation as a person, but really at the heart of it is this love story. That's the whole piece that pins it all together.
Yeah,
I mean,
I don't think it's his weakness. I think everything he does to serve the greater good.
And the greater good in this is
Scott's progression.
Right.
And so even though that the love story is, you would put it in the plot summary because it's why he's fighting the X's. It's why he's doing whatever. But To me, him ending up with Ramona or Knives in the end isn't really the point.
Well, I guess that's true because at the end I didn't really care who he ended up with. Honestly, he could have ended up with either one of them, and I'd be okay. That's how that ends because it kind of plays out both ways, but it ultimately ends up being with Ramona. But for a while there, it yanks you and thinks that it's going to be that he's going to be with Knives. Which to me also adds to the ambiguity about what the movie is even really trying to say. I mean, aside from maybe that he should have some more self-respect, at the same time, why he deserves so much more self-respect, I don't even really know. I don't know what he's done to really earn that enlightenment.
Well, that's the thing. He didn't just earn magically self-respect. It came with the responsibility of owning up to what he did and humility of telling Knives, yeah, I cheated on you, and telling Ramona, I've already said this, yeah, I was dating Knives when we first started dating. Mm-hmm. And it's a stark contrast, and the reason the movie went back and did it twice is because the first time Knives and Ramona had to pull it out of him, and he didn't really admit. He still came up with an excuse for it.
You cheated on both of us?
You cheated on me with Knives?
No, I cheated on Knives with you.
Is there a difference?
You weren't wronged, right?
Right.
And so his self-respect came from, I can't respect myself unless I am completely upfront about things, that I own up for what I've done wrong, and I have a life worth fighting for.
I see what you're saying. I think it is what the movie's trying to do. Maybe it just goes back to it's just it's too little too late. I mean, you spend the whole time with this Michael Cera character as the person who always feels like he's the victim, when really you understand that he's just kind of he's overall kind of selfish and unaware of that.
He vacillates between feeling like a victim and feeling like a hero. I think that's the whole time.
Right.
That he doesn't feel put upon the entire movie.
No, I mean, I don't. What I mean by that is that when it comes to the relationship with the girls, and especially with the ex he had before, I forget the
Envy.
Brie Larson.
Envy.
In that situation, he certainly does feel like the victim.
Yeah.
And so I guess it just feels like he just kind of wanders throughout the whole movie without a whole lot of self-reflection, and that's what the whole ending is about.
That's
really,
why he's dumb, because he thinks he can never victimize somebody because he's been made the victim.
But at what point do you get so annoyed with a character to where you don't even care about their redemption by the end? I didn't see a whole lot to really even love about any of these characters, to be honest. I didn't hate them. I found them kind of annoying. A lot of them I actually found kind of annoying. Here's the other thing also, is I felt like, you know what? This movie probably would have worked better for me if it was a legitimate high school movie, but it's not. These are supposed to be these are not supposed to be adolescents. These are supposed to be 20-somethings. Yeah. Now, if that had been somewhere addressed in the movie where it was kind of obvious, like, these are people who need to grow up, which I think in subtle ways Edgar Wright does better in his other movies. Like, there's a sadness to Simon Pegg's character in Shaun of the Dead, even though he is in a lot of ways similar to Michael Cera. He's kind of a stuck character who hasn't grown up, and for some reason, there's so much more empathy I have for that character. Maybe even at the time I watched it, sympathy for him, because I felt like I was in the same place. But it wasn't portrayed as something that was worth staying in for so long. Or if it was, he was just as clueless as Michael Cera is, and it was through the whole zombie thing that he kind of reaches his maturation point. I just feel like it was done so much better, and maybe that's because just Simon Pegg's so much better than Michael Cera. I don't know, but to me, that movie sold that idea. This movie it really bugged me. It got to the point where there was the scene where Steven Stills, is that his name?
The lead singer.
He says, "Meet me at the bar," and I had to think for a sec. Are these kids old enough to drink? Oh yeah, wait, they're supposed to be in their 20s. That's totally acceptable for them to go to the bar, but they act like high schoolers throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, that always was an odd thing to me, that he's dating a 17-year-old. What's the age of consent in Canada?
I don't know. We should look that up.
That's interesting. I can see I can see that, because this feels like a lesson you should be learning when you're in high school rather than a lesson you should learn when you're 22. But fact of the matter is, a lot of people don't learn this lesson until later in life. I don't know. Maybe it's just simply Michael Cera, and maybe some of the other actors for you, but I don't see such a big difference in taking genres and infusing them with subtle lessons about aging and growing up. This movie is right in line thematically with Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and World's End. And I don't know why it doesn't come across that way to you, that it feels to you that I'm reading into it and interpreting too deep.
Well, I think this is where I'm trying to say. I think what I'm ultimately trying to say, and I've said it before, is I just don't think it works. I can see that that's what it's trying to do, and it does fit in line with what Edgar Wright does. I think he succeeds so well in Shaun of the Dead and even in The World's End, where The World's End even more so because I feel like I was even much more in that. I mean, I'm older now, just like those characters are older in that movie. So it was something where I could definitely resonate with some of those characters and their feelings of nostalgia in a way that lesson about needing to mature didn't feel so mature in Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
I don't know what to say. My heart is broken, for one.
I don't know.
And maybe I've bitten off way more than I can chew by trying to make it something more than it actually is, because I still think I'm just surprised that that it's not funny enough, and like you just don't think it's that funny.
Oh, I think it's very funny, although I do think the humor wears itself out by the end. I just think it burns out. Like I can only take so much of that. Not just the referential humor, because I actually don't think that's as strong as people make it out to be.
No, and it's a difference between Shaun of the Dead or, Hot Fuzz being a satire and like Scary Movie, and like it's not to fault it for its nostalgia and referentialism, I think is a bit thoughtless, because it's not like Family Guy, where it's just like, hey, here's a thing you guys have heard
right.
of.
Remember this? Isn't that funny? Yeah.
That anything that's a reference serves the story, like the Seinfeld thing.
I agree.
I just watched it this time. I'm like, I was laughing, but am I only laughing because I remember Seinfeld? But it's actually serving to show how Scott feels at that time. Scott feels like the funniest guy in the world, so he's got a laugh track. He feels like the most popular guy in the world, so people cheer when he comes in. Feels like the sexiest guy, so when he mentions getting to first and half base, people like.
It's a great scene. I like that scene. I laughed. I laughed quite a bit during it. I just felt like as you got further and further, and as the fights kept piling on and onto each other, even those flourishes, which I think are awesome that Edgar Wright does. Without a little bit more spacing, I guess, or a little bit more timing, it can get to be a little bit where about the 10th time you see it, it's not quite as funny as the first time you saw it.
I mean, again, we're not necessarily debating how great Edgar Wright is or how it's just, I guess I can't argue that this movie, I can't argue against that it doesn't work for somebody. Mm-hmm. Because for me, it's just a matter of the change in Scott, the change in the characters, is genuine enough to me. It doesn't need to be dramatic, and I'm not saying for you it does need to be dramatic. To me, it's there enough and intentional enough and executed well enough that, subtle as it is to me, weak as it is to you, it works. The idea that there is any genuine feeling and they put it as a subtle shift from like, a character that maybe you don't like in the beginning to a character that maybe you don't like so much in the end, but he still has made some sort of a change.
Ramona! I need to tell you something.
Yeah, I have something I have to tell you, too.
Great, listen, I know you play mysterious and aloof just to avoid getting hurt. And I know you have reasons for not wanting to talk about your past. And I want you to know I don't care about any of that stuff. Because I'm in lesbians with you.
What?
I really, really mean it.
I just feel like the movie could have been just like rubber stamped broad appeal. And it tried some things that for me worked.
I feel like we're kind of at a spot where we're just going to have to basically, there are things that you have found in it that I don't necessarily say aren't there. It's just the movie itself didn't carry me through that same process to where I was able to buy it as wholeheartedly as you were.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like I've failed. I feel like I love this movie too much to be able to articulately.
I don't
argue
take
about
pride or I don't take any joy in knocking this down for people who like it, because Lord knows there are plenty of movies I like that would also have that sort of moniker of it's not for everyone, and I would love to make the case that it is for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that when you find a movie like that, you really do want to try to get everyone to see it the way you see it.
I think what I've succeeded in doing is making one of the most fun movies super unfun.
So it looks like, in this classic Can We Still Be Friends podcast episode, we're kind of at a point where we can... I hope, baby, you can understand at least where I'm coming from. I still respect you for liking this movie.
Well,
it's
thanks.
not. I don't think you're wrong in liking it necessarily. I just, to the degree that you like it, I'm a little confused. But hey, you've explained yourself. I've explained myself, and so at this point,
Well, I feel like I've explained myself, but not really, because I love this movie without. I feel like I would love it even if I didn't think Edgar Wright were really trying to be so subversive and subtle. And I feel like I lean so heavily on the subtlety that I see in it that I've completely ignored the fact that I laugh throughout, and from beginning to end, I'm with this movie.
Really good garlic bread. Garlic bread is my favorite food. I could honestly eat it for every meal, or just eat it all the time without even stopping.
You get fat.
No, why would I get fat?
Bread makes you fat.
Bread makes you fat?
so anyways, please,
Yeah.
we want to hear what you think about what we said about Scott Pilgrim versus the World. We've kind of raised an issue of, is this one that really is for a niche group, or is it one that should have universal appeal, or does have universal appeal? I'd love to hear more people chime in on that topic especially. But anything that you think about Scott Pilgrim versus the World, we'd love to hear from you. Twitter, on our Facebook, on our website, canwestillbefriends.net, or email us feedback@canwestillbefriends.net. So for our next episode, we're going to keep it going with this summer blockbuster theme, and we're going to try to take on the king of the summer blockbuster, Steven Spielberg. We also thought it would be fun if we took a movie that we loved as a kid and then rewatched it so that we could actually discuss through the lens of our youthful selves, to kind of re-watch something with fresh, adult, cynical eyes. So we thought it would be fun to take on Steven Spielberg's Hook. And I'm really excited to rewatch this one because it's been forever, and I don't have any clue how I'm going to feel about this.
But I'm excited to see it again. I've been watching a lot of Spielberg movies this summer, based off the dissolved list. I've seen Jaws, Jurassic Park, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and listeners will be glad to know,
All right, here it is.
even though it didn't make the summer blockbuster list, and I didn't particularly enjoy it,
Blasphemy!
I saw Temple of Doom finally. And that means that you guys can stop egging my house. It means you can stop with the threatening phone calls. For some of you, it means that you can listen to the podcast again.
But you not liking it practically rips my heart out.
Well, I know, very funny. But I know how you feel. I honestly feel like beaten up at the end of this episode, this Scott Pilgrim thing. So I know how you feel. But I won't ask you to defend Temple of Doom.
No, please
because I
don't.
said this to somebody earlier. It's almost like, maybe I even said it to you, it's almost like forcing someone to defend Chuck E. Cheese as a good restaurant.
Right, yeah.
Because it's like, well, no, it's
Chuck E.
it
Cheese.
did what it
but
did
yeah.
when you were that age.
Right.
But yeah. So, Temple of Doom, I've seen it. Check that box.
Check it off. It's
Of
another
credibility.
Spielberg. And we're going to watch Hook in the next episode. So please watch it with us. We are going to post on our Facebook and our Twitter and our website a post so that you can actually start giving us some feedback on Hook before we actually record the episode, because that worked really well with Scott Pilgrim. It was great to hear from you guys before we actually even recorded, so we could bring some of that feedback in.
Also, still talk about Scott Pilgrim, and we'll discuss what you guys have to say on the next episode.
So until then, thanks a lot for listening, and we hope you'll join us next time for our discussion.
Thanks.